The blue sun of Kepler 438b was dying, not naturally but slowly eaten away by the black ships that had come from the dark between stars. Elder Vexithera stood at the tall window of the communication center, watching the last of her world burn. 3 years. 3 long years since the Scourge had first appeared in their star system. 3 years of sending messages across the galaxy, begging for help that never came. Elder, the transmission array is ready, said Kethvon, her young assistant. His silver skin had lost its natural glow. Like all Zephyrians, he looked tired and afraid. Vexithera turned from the window. Outside, the sky was dark with smoke. The beautiful crystal cities of her people lay in ruins. Where once stood towers of pure light, now grew the twisted black spires of the Scourge. They called them harvesting towers. Vexithera had seen what they harvested. Has the council responded to our last message? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Kethvon looked down at his webbed feet. No, Elder. Ambassador Zixtal says they will not risk their fleets for a lost cause. A lost cause. That's what the Galactic Council called her people now. The Zephyrians had once been respected across the galaxy. Their art, their music, their scientific discoveries had brought peace and beauty to 100 worlds. But they had never learned to fight. They had never needed to, until the Scourge came. The Scourge were unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. They were not really alive, but not really machines either. They were something in between, something wrong. They consumed everything in their path, turning it into more of themselves. They adapted to every weapon, every defense. What worked once never worked again. The first world to fall had been Theta Proxima. The defenders there had powerful energy shields and plasma cannons. The Scourge had adapted within hours. The second world had used kinetic weapons and gravity bombs. The Scourge had learned to counter those too. World after world fell, and each time the enemy grew stronger. Now it was Kepler 438b's turn to die. Elder, we have detected movement in the northern sector, reported Yelandra from her position at the scanner array. More bioships are landing, Vexithara nodded sadly. The bioships were living vessels that carried Scourge warriors. They looked like giant insects made of black metal and pulsing flesh. Each one carried hundreds of the enemy soldiers. How many? She asked. 12 ships, Elder. Large ones. That meant over 3,000 more Scourge on the ground. The defense force had maybe 200 fighters left hiding in the underground tunnels. They would not last another day. Elder, Kethvon said quietly, perhaps we should send the message to Earth. Vexithara almost laughed, but there was no humor left in her. Earth. The legendary world that might not even exist. Some traders spoke of it in whispers, telling stories of a violent species that had never learned to travel between stars. Most scientists believed it was just a myth. But 3 months ago they had received a strange signal from the outer rim. It had been weak, almost lost in the background noise of space. The message had been simple. This is Earth. We hear you. We are coming. No one believed it. How could a species that couldn't travel faster than light reach them in time? Even if they existed, even if they had somehow developed space travel, it would take them centuries to cross the galaxy. But now, with nowhere else to turn, maybe it was time to try. Set up the transmission to the coordinates from that signal, Vexithara ordered. Kethvon's eyes widened. Elder, are you sure? Even if they exist, even if they received our messages, they couldn't possibly— What else do we have? Vexithara interrupted. The Council has abandoned us. The defense fleet is gone. Our weapons are useless. If there is even a small chance that someone somewhere might hear us and care enough to help. She walked to the transmission console. The device was one of the most powerful in the galaxy, capable of sending messages across thousands of light years. It had been built to share knowledge and art with distant civilizations. Now it would send a final cry for help into the void. The building shook as explosions echoed from outside. Through the window, Vexithera could see Scourge flyers diving toward the remaining civilian shelters. She had to hurry. This is Elder Vexithera of the Zephyrian High Council, she began, speaking into the transmitter. Our world is dying. The Scourge have taken our cities, our people, our hope. We have fought for 3 years, but we cannot stop them. We know nothing of your species except rumors and legends. We do not know if you can travel between stars, or if you have weapons that could stand against an enemy that adapts to everything we throw at them. We do not even know if you exist. But if you are real, if you can hear this message, we beg you to help us. Not just for the Zephyrians, but for all the innocent species in this galaxy. The scourge will not stop with us. They will consume everything until nothing remains but their hunger. We have included our star charts and tactical reports in this transmission. If you come, you will find a world already lost. But perhaps our death might teach you something that could save others. If anyone receives this, remember us. Remember that we tried to preserve beauty in this universe. Remember that some things are worth fighting for even when the fight cannot be won. The building shook again, harder this time. Dust fell from the ceiling. Through the communications array, Vexithara could hear the sounds of battle getting closer. Her people were making their last stand. Elder, Ylandra called out in panic. Bioships are landing around the building. Scourge warriors are moving toward our position. Vexithara looked at the transmission controls. The message was still sending, but it would take several more minutes to complete the upload of all their data. She could hear weapons fire in the corridors below. Her guards were fighting, but they would not hold for long. Keep the transmission running, she ordered. No matter what happens. Kethvon moved to her side. Elder, we should go to the emergency shelter. No, Vexithara said firmly. If this message is our last hope, someone must make sure it goes out completely. The sound of fighting grew louder. She could hear the distinctive buzz of scourge energy weapons and the screams of her people. The enemy was in the building. The transmission progress bar showed 90% complete. So close. The door to the communication center exploded inward. Black shapes poured through the smoke. Scourge warriors in their biomechanical armor. They moved like spiders, fast and wrong. Their eyes glowed red in faces that were half flesh, half machine. Ylandra screamed and fell as an energy beam struck her. Kethvon tried to shield Vexithara, but the enemy weapons cut him down instantly. Vexithara stood alone at the console, watching the progress bar crawl toward completion. 95%. 98%. A scourge warrior approached her, its weapon charging with a high whine. She could smell the corruption that surrounded these creatures. The stench of life twisted into something unnatural. 99%. For all the beautiful things in this universe, she whispered. 100%. Transmission complete. The scourge warrior fired, and Elder Vexithara of the Zephyrian High Council fell. But her message was already racing across the galaxy at the speed of light, carrying with it the hope that someone, somewhere, would care enough to answer. In the deep black of space, far beyond the dying world of Kepler 438b, a small blue planet received the transmission. And on that planet, people who had never forgotten how to fight began to prepare for war. 6 months had passed since the last transmission from Kepler. 438b went silent, deep beneath the mountains of Colorado, in a facility that didn't exist on any public map. Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the largest holographic display ever built. The image showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, with red dots marking every world the scourge had consumed. There were too many red dots. "Show me the Zephyrian system again," she commanded. The display zoomed in on a distant sector. The blue star was still there, but the signals from the planet had stopped months ago. Another world gone dark, another civilization erased. "Admiral," said Colonel Martinez, her second in command. "The fleet is ready. 300 ships, 30,000 troops. The best we've ever trained." Sarah nodded but didn't take her eyes off the display. 30,000 soldiers seemed like a lot until you considered they were planning to fight an enemy that had consumed entire star systems. An enemy that the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy couldn't stop. But humans had advantages the galaxy didn't know about. "Tell me about the Martian ruins again, Dr. Hayes," Sarah said to the elderly scientist standing nearby. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes had spent her entire career studying the ancient structures they'd found on Mars 20 years ago. What they'd discovered there had changed everything humanity thought they knew about their place in the universe. "The ruins are approximately 50,000 years old," Hayes began. "The civilization that built them was incredibly advanced, but they were wiped out by something that matches the description of the scourge. However, they left behind detailed records of the enemy's tactics and weaknesses. The Martian civilization had been the first to fight the scourge. They had lost, but not before learning valuable lessons. Lessons that had been waiting in the red dust of Mars for humanity to find. The key insight," Hayes continued, "is that the scourge adapt to patterns. Every other species fights them the same way, with predictable tactics and consistent technology. The Martians discovered that chaos is the only thing the scourge cannot counter." Sarah had spent 5 years studying those records. While the rest of the galaxy developed bigger guns and stronger shields, humanity had learned a different lesson. They had learned to be unpredictable. "Status report on Project Hammer," she ordered. "All ships are equipped with the new weapon systems," Martinez replied. "Chemical explosives, kinetic rounds, plasma cannons, and railguns. Each ship carries at least 4 different weapon types, and we can switch between them rapidly." It seemed primitive compared to the advanced energy weapons other species used. But that was the point. The Scourge had adapted to energy weapons centuries ago. They had never faced an enemy that would use explosives 1 minute and bullets the next. "What about the biosamples from Kepler 438b?" Sarah asked. A new voice answered from the back of the room. "We've completed the analysis, Admiral." Dr. James Park stepped forward, carrying a tablet filled with data. He was the head of the xenobiology team, the group responsible for understanding how the Scourge actually worked. "The enemy isn't truly alive in any sense we understand," Park explained. "They're more like biological machines. They have a central nervous system that coordinates their adaptation process, but it relies on consistent patterns to function effectively." Sarah studied the data. The Scourge were like a computer that could rewrite its own code. But like any computer, they could be confused if you fed them the wrong information. "Show her the test results," Hayes urged. Park pulled up a video file. It showed a laboratory where scientists had created small Scourge samples based on the data from Kepler 438b. In the video, they attacked the samples with an energy weapon. The Scourge quickly adapted, becoming immune to that type of energy. Then they switched to a completely different weapon, a simple chemical explosive. The Scourge were destroyed instantly. They had adapted to energy weapons, but that adaptation made them vulnerable to primitive explosives. "The key is never using the same tactic twice in a row," Park explained. "Keep them guessing, keep them adapting to the wrong things, and they become vulnerable to everything else." Sarah smiled for the first time in months. Other species saw humanity as primitive because they still used chemical weapons and metal bullets. They didn't understand that sometimes the old ways were better than the new ones. "Admiral," Martinez said quietly, "there's something else. The signal we received from Kepler 438b, it included something we didn't expect." "What?" "Coordinates for other worlds under attack. The Zephyrians were tracking Scourge movements across their entire sector. We know where the enemy will strike next." Sarah looked at the map again. Red dots showed where worlds had already fallen. Blue dots showed worlds that were currently under attack, and yellow dots showed worlds that would be attacked soon. Too many dots. Too many civilizations that needed help. "The Galactic Council knows about these attacks?" she asked. "Yes, but they've declared the entire sector a loss. They're pulling back their fleets to protect more important systems." Important systems, meaning systems with valuable resources or powerful militaries. The Council was abandoning entire civilizations because they didn't have anything worth saving. Sarah felt anger rise in her chest. She had read the Zephyrian transmissions. They were artists and scientists, people who created beautiful things and shared them freely with the galaxy. They had never hurt anyone. And when they begged for help, the galaxy had turned its back on them. "Admiral," Hayes said softly, "we should discuss the risks. This will be humanity's first contact with galactic civilization. If we fail, if the Scourge adapt to our tactics too quickly, we could be giving them information they could use against Earth." Sarah had thought about that. Taking the fleet to Kepler 438b would reveal humanity's existence to the galaxy. There would be no going back, no more hiding behind the myth that Earth was just a legend. But she had also read the Zephyrian message. Remember that some things are worth fighting for even when the fight cannot be won. "Colonel Martinez," she said, "send word to all ship commanders. We launch in 6 hours. "Yes, Admiral." "What should I tell them our mission objectives are?" Sarah looked one more time at the red dot that had once been Kepler 438b. Somewhere in that system, the Scourge were building more ships, preparing to attack more worlds, planning to consume more civilizations. "Tell them we're going to teach the galaxy something new about fighting," she said. "Tell them we're going to show these aliens what humans do when someone needs help." Martinez smiled and saluted. "And if they ask about the enemy? About the risks?" Sarah thought about the Martian ruins, about the civilization that had fought and died 50,000 years ago, trying to stop the Scourge. They had failed, but they had left behind the knowledge humanity needed to succeed. Tell them the Scourge think they've seen everything the galaxy can throw at them, she said. They think they can adapt to any weapon, any tactic, any strategy. She turned to face her officers, and they could see the determination in her eyes. They've never fought humans before. In the launch bays far below, 300 ships prepared for departure. Each one carried soldiers who had trained their entire lives for this moment. They were armed with weapons the galaxy considered obsolete, using tactics that seemed primitive, following strategies that made no sense to advanced civilizations. But they were human. And humans had learned something in their long history of war that no other species understood. Sometimes the best way to win was to fight like you had nothing to lose. The fleet launched into the dark between stars, carrying with them the hope that it wasn't too late to save at least some of the galaxy from the hunger that consumed everything it touched. Behind them, Earth continued to spin quietly around its yellow sun, a small blue world that was about to announce itself to the universe in the only language it had ever really mastered, the language of war. The underground tunnels beneath New Zephyria had once been part of the city's transportation system. Beautiful crystal tubes that carried people through tubes of pure light. Now they were dark, cold, and filled with the last survivors of a dying world. Vexithara was not dead. The Scourge weapon had struck her in the shoulder, not the heart. She had fallen and pretended to die while the enemy creatures destroyed the communication center above her. Kethavan had saved her life by falling on top of her, hiding her body with his own. Now she led a group of 200 survivors through tunnels that reeked of fear and desperation. They had food for maybe a week, clean water for less than that, and above them, the Scourge continued their work of turning Kepler 438b into another harvesting world. Elder, whispered Yexmora, one of the younger survivors. The children are asking about the surface. They want to know when we can go home. Vexithara looked at the small group of Zephyrian children huddled together in the dim light. Their parents had died in the first attack 6 months ago. The survivors had been caring for them ever since, but what future could they offer? Tell them we will go home when the sky is safe again, she said gently. It was a lie, but sometimes lies were kinder than truth. Elder, called out Jixandi from the tunnel entrance, you need to see this. Vexithara made her way to the observation post they had set up near one of the old ventilation shafts. Through a crack in the metal, they could see a small piece of the surface world. What they saw made no sense. The sky was on fire. Streaks of light were falling from space like burning rain. But these weren't Scourge bioships. The shapes were wrong, too angular, too mechanical, and they were falling fast, much faster than the organic vessels the enemy used. What are they? Yexmora asked in a frightened whisper. Vexithara studied the falling lights. Some were small and moved in formation. Others were larger and seemed to be heading for specific locations. All of them glowed with the heat of atmospheric entry. I don't know, she admitted, but they're not Scourge. One of the larger objects crashed into the ground about a mile away. The impact shook the tunnels and sent dust falling from the ceiling. Then another landed closer and another. Whatever was happening, it was happening all over the planet. Through their small window to the surface, they could see Scourge bioships rising to meet the newcomers. Energy beams flashed across the sky as the enemy tried to shoot down the falling objects. But there were too many of them coming from too many directions. Look! Jixandi pointed at a spot near the ruined communication center. A small object had landed there, and now something was emerging from it. Even at this distance, they could see it was not a Scourge creature. It moved wrong, too upright, too purposeful, and it was carrying something that flashed in the dim light. A weapon. More shapes emerged from other landing sites. They moved quickly across the broken ground, not fleeing from the Scourge but moving toward them. Within minutes, the sounds of battle echoed across the surface, but this battle was different from anything the Zephyrians had heard before. The Scourge energy weapons made their familiar buzzing sound, but the return fire was sharp and loud, explosive, violent in a way that made the ground shake. They're fighting the Scourge, Vexithara said in amazement. Who are they? Yexmora asked. Before Vexithara could answer, a new sound echoed through the tunnels. Footsteps, heavy and metallic, coming from the main entrance. The survivors grabbed what weapons they had, mostly tools and a few old energy pistols, and prepared to make their last stand. The footsteps stopped at the tunnel entrance. Then a voice called out, speaking in broken but understandable Zephyrian. "Hello in there. We are friends. We are here to help." The accent was strange, the grammar imperfect, but the meaning was clear. Vexithera approached the entrance carefully, her small weapon ready. "Who are you?" she called back. "We are humans. From Earth you sent a message. We came." Vexithera's legs almost gave out. Humans. The mythical species from the edge of the galaxy. They were real and they had come. "How do we know you're not Scourge?" she asked, though her heart was already telling her the truth. "Because," the voice replied with what might have been humor. "Scourge don't knock." Despite everything, Vexithera found herself smiling. She opened the tunnel entrance. The figure standing there was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was tall, almost as tall as a Zephyrian, but built differently. Heavier, stronger. It wore armor that looked crude compared to Galactic Council technology, but somehow more practical. More real. The face behind the helmet's transparent section was strange but not frightening. 2 eyes instead of 4. Skin that was brown instead of silver. Features that spoke of a completely different evolutionary path. But those eyes showed intelligence and determination and something else. Compassion. "I am Sergeant Rodriguez," the human said. "We got your message. We're here to help, but how?" Vexithera stammered. "You couldn't have traveled fast enough. The galaxy says humans don't have faster-than-light travel." Rodriguez smiled, and she could see teeth that were white and straight. "The galaxy says a lot of things about humans. Most of them are wrong." He stepped aside, and Vexithera could see more humans moving through the ruins outside. They moved like soldiers, like people who knew how to fight and weren't afraid to do it. Their weapons looked primitive, but they carried them with confidence. "How many of you are there?" she asked. 30,000 on the ground," Rodriguez replied. "More in orbit?" "Don't worry, Elder Vexithera. We read your message. We know what happened here. We know what these things did to your people." He looked directly into her eyes, and she could see something burning there. Anger. Not at her, but at the creatures that had destroyed her world. "We also know something the Scourge don't," he continued. "We know how to kill them." As if to prove his point, an explosion echoed from nearby. Through the tunnel entrance, Vexithera could see one of the Scourge harvesting towers collapsing in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. "That's not possible," she said. "They adapt to every weapon, every tactic. They learn and become immune." Rodriguez grinned, and it was not a nice expression. "They've never fought humans before." Another explosion closer this time. More human voices could be heard outside, coordinating their attacks with efficient military precision. The sounds of Scourge energy weapons were becoming less frequent. "Elder," Yexmora whispered, "should we trust them?" Vexithera looked at the human sergeant. He was offering her his hand, a gesture that needed no translation. Trust. Partnership. Hope. "You came," she said simply. "When no one else would, you came." "We got your message about beauty being worth preserving," Rodriguez said. "We figured anyone who could say that while their world was dying was worth saving." She took his hand. His grip was firm and warm despite the armor. "What do you need us to do?" she asked. "First we get your people to safety. Then we show these Scourge something they've never seen before." "What's that?" Rodriguez looked back toward the surface, where his fellow humans were systematically destroying an enemy that had conquered half the galaxy. "What happens when Earth goes to war?" The sounds of battle continued above, but for the first time in months, Vexithera allowed herself to hope. The humans had come. Against all logic, against impossible odds, they had crossed the galaxy to answer a desperate plea for help. And from the sound of the explosions echoing through the tunnels, they had brought exactly what was needed, the kind of violence that could match the Scourge's hunger with something even more dangerous. Human determination. The Scourge had never been confused before. In the central hive mind that connected all their forces across the galaxy, something new was happening. Error messages flickered through their collective consciousness. Adaptation protocols failed to initialize. Target analysis returned impossible results. The enemy on Kepler 438b was not behaving according to any known pattern. At 0800 hours, the humans attacked the Eastern Harvesting Complex with kinetic weapons. Simple metal bullets fired at high speed. The Scourge adapted within minutes, developing armor that could deflect any projectile. At 0830 hours, the humans attacked the same complex with chemical explosives. The new armor that protected against bullets made the explosives twice as effective. The complex was destroyed. At 0900 hours, the humans attacked the Western complex with plasma weapons. The Scourge adapted, developing energy absorption systems that made them nearly immune to directed energy. At 0930 hours, the humans attacked with bullets again. The energy absorption systems that protected against plasma actually attracted the metal projectiles, making them more deadly. Another complex fell. The pattern made no sense. Every military database the Scourge had consumed taught the same lesson. Find the most effective weapon and use it until the enemy is defeated. But these humans seemed to deliberately choose the least effective weapon for each situation. Colonel Maria Santos crouched behind the rubble of what had once been a Zephyrian art museum. Her tactical display showed the positions of 3 Scourge assault groups moving toward her position. Each group had adapted to counter the last weapon her team had used against them. Perfect. Rodriguez, what's your loadout? She asked into her comm. Plasma rifle, thermite grenades, and a shotgun, came the reply from 2 blocks away. Switch to the shotgun. Jackson, you're carrying the rail pistol, right? Yes, ma'am. Go with the plasma grenades. Chen, stick with kinetic rounds but switch to explosive tips. Her squad leaders acknowledged the orders without question. They had trained for this kind of fighting for years. The key was never letting the enemy predict what was coming next. The Scourge assault groups rounded the corner, their biomechanical armor gleaming with fresh adaptations. The first group had developed thick plating to stop bullets. The second group had energy dispersal fields to counter plasma weapons. The third group had reactive armor designed to absorb explosive impacts. Santos smiled. Light them up. Rodriguez opened fire with his shotgun, sending hundreds of small metal pellets at the anti-bullet group. Their armor had been designed to stop large, fast projectiles, not swarms of small ones. The pellets found gaps in the plating and brought down 3 warriors before they could react. Jackson hit the energy-resistant group with plasma grenades. Their dispersal fields were designed for directed energy beams, not for explosive plasma clouds. The superheated gas cooked them in their own armor. Chen targeted the explosive-resistant group with armor-piercing rounds. Their reactive armor was meant to absorb the force of explosions, but it did nothing against bullets designed to punch through tank plating. All 3 groups fell within seconds. Chalk up another win for Chaos Theory. Rodriguez reported cheerfully. Santos checked her tactical display. Across the planet, similar scenes were playing out. Human forces were systematically destroying Scourge positions by using the enemy's own adaptations against them. The key was unpredictability. Humans had spent thousands of years fighting each other, developing weapons and tactics to counter every possible defense. When facing an enemy that could adapt to anything, the solution was simple. Never give them anything consistent to adapt to. Santos, this is Admiral Chen. Status report. Sector 7 is clear, Admiral. Moving on to the bioship landing sites. Good work. Remember, keep rotating your weapon types. Intelligence reports that the Scourge adaptation rate is slowing down. Their hive mind is getting overloaded trying to process all our tactical changes. Santos grinned. The Scourge were like a computer trying to run too many programs at once. Eventually, something had to crash. Meanwhile, in orbit around Kepler 438b, Captain Liu Wei faced a different kind of challenge. His destroyer, the UES Determination, was engaging 3 Scourge bioships at once. Each one was the size of a space station, armed with weapons that could crack a planet's crust, but Liu had advantages they didn't expect. Target the lead ship with nuclear torpedoes, he ordered. Sir, our plasma cannons would be more effective against their energy shields, his tactical officer suggested. That's exactly why we're not using them. Liu replied. The nuclear torpedoes struck the bioship's shields and exploded in brilliant balls of fire. The shields held, but Liu could see the enemy vessel beginning to adapt. Its outer hull was already changing, developing better radiation shielding. Now hit them with the railgun, he ordered. Solid tungsten rounds, accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, punched through the bioship's hull like needles through paper. The radiation shielding they had just developed actually made the kinetic impacts more devastating by weakening the overall structure. Sir, the second ship is adapting to kinetic weapons, his sensor operator reported. Perfect. Target it with plasma cannons. The second bioship had developed armor designed to spread kinetic impacts across its hull. But plasma didn't have impact. It simply melted whatever it touched. The armor that protected against bullets became a conductor for the superheated gas, spreading the damage throughout the ship's structure. The third bioship, having watched its companions adapt incorrectly, tried a different approach. Instead of changing its defenses, it attempted to flee. Target the engines with conventional missiles, Liu ordered. The bioship's defenses were optimized against the advanced weapons it had just faced. Simple chemical explosives, the kind humanity had been using for centuries. Overwhelmed systems designed to counter plasma and kinetic weapons. All three bioships drifted dead in space within 10 minutes. "This is insane," Liu's tactical officer muttered. "We just defeated 3 capital ships using weapons the galaxy considers obsolete." "The galaxy doesn't understand humans very well," Liu replied. "They think advanced means better. Sometimes simple is more effective." Back on the surface, Vexithara watched the human soldiers work with amazement. They moved through the ruins of her city like deadly dancers, each team coordinating with the others to create patterns of destruction that seemed random but were actually carefully planned. A group of Scourge warriors emerged from one of the twisted biostructures that had grown where her library used to stand. The creatures had adapted to counter human weapons throughout the day, developing layers of protection that should have made them nearly invincible. The human squad that engaged them used flamethrowers. Fire was one of the oldest weapons in human history. It was simple, primitive, and completely unexpected. The Scourge had developed defenses against every advanced weapon imaginable, but their biomechanical components were still vulnerable to something as basic as burning fuel. "How did you know?" Vexithara asked Sergeant Rodriguez as they watched the enemy position burn. "Know what? How did you know they wouldn't adapt to fire?" Rodriguez shrugged. "We didn't. But that's the point. We use whatever works until it doesn't work, then we try something else. The trick is having a lot of something elses ready to go." He gestured toward his squad, each member carrying multiple weapon types. "Chen there has explosives, energy weapons, kinetic rounds, and chemical agents. Jackson carries everything from plasma guns to crossbows. We even have some people with swords." "Swords? Against an enemy with energy shields?" "Energy shields stop energy. They don't stop a sharp piece of metal moving fast enough." Vexithara shook her head in wonder. The galactic community had spent centuries developing more and more advanced weapons, convinced that technological superiority was the key to victory. Meanwhile, humans had simply prepared for every possible situation with every possible tool. "The Scourge adaptation protocols are failing," Rodriguez explained. "Their hive mind was designed to counter logical, predictable enemies. But human tactics aren't logical. We use whatever works, even if it doesn't make sense." As if to prove his point, an explosion echoed from the next district. A human team had just destroyed a Scourge command post using what appeared to be medieval catapults loaded with modern explosives. "Why catapults?" Vexithara asked. Rodriguez grinned. "Because no one expects catapults." The sounds of battle continued across the planet, but now they were different. Instead of the steady buzz of Scourge energy weapons dominating the fight, there was a chaotic mixture of explosions, gunfire, and stranger sounds that Vexithara couldn't identify. It was the sound of humanity at war, using 10,000 years of military innovation all at once against an enemy that had never learned to expect the unexpected. The Scourge hive ship was dying. The massive biovessel hung in space above Kepler 438b like a diseased moon, its organic hull pulsing with the rhythm of a failing heart. For the first time in their existence, the Scourge were afraid. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, watching the enemy's command ship through the view screen. Intelligence reports showed that destroying the hive ship would sever the connection between all Scourge forces in the system. Without central coordination, the individual bioships and ground forces would be vulnerable. The problem was getting close enough to do it. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council fleet," reported Commander Kim. "They've just arrived at the system's edge." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "The same council that declared this sector a lost cause?" "Yes, ma'am. They're requesting permission to assist in the final assault." Sarah looked at the tactical display. The council fleet was impressive. 12 massive dreadnoughts with enough firepower to glass a planet. Ships that represented the most advanced military technology in the galaxy. "Tell them they're welcome to watch," she said. "But this is humanity's fight." She opened a channel to all human ships in the system. All units, this is Admiral Chen. Operation Hammer is a go. Remember, the hive ship adapts faster than individual units. We get one chance to surprise it. Across the fleet, 30,000 human soldiers prepared for the final battle. On the surface, Sergeant Rodriguez looked up at the sky where the hive ship blotted out the stars. You hear that, people? He called to his squad. Time to show the galaxy how humans end a war. The assault began with what appeared to be a conventional attack. Human ships approached the hive ship in standard formation, firing plasma cannons and missile salvos. The biovessel's defenses responded predictably, adapting to counter the incoming weapons. Within minutes, the hive ship had developed energy absorption fields that made plasma weapons useless. Its hull thickened to absorb missile impacts. Its point defense systems evolved to intercept kinetic projectiles. It was perfectly adapted to fight the human fleet, which was exactly what Admiral Chen wanted. All ships, execute pattern Omega, she commanded. Every human vessel suddenly changed course, diving toward the planet's surface. The Scourge command ship watched in confusion as its enemies appeared to retreat, just when they had gained the upper hand. But the humans weren't retreating. They were setting up for the most insane military maneuver in galactic history. Admiral, Commander Kim said nervously. Are you sure about this? The risk calculations don't account for human stubbornness, Sarah replied. Initiate ramming course. Full speed. The UES Retribution, flagship of humanity's first interstellar fleet, turned directly toward the hive ship and accelerated. Behind it, every other human vessel did the same. 30 ships, each carrying 1,000 crew members, on a collision course with an enemy vessel, the size of a city. The Galactic Council fleet watched in horror as the humans appeared to commit mass suicide. They're all going to die, whispered Admiral Zixtal of the Council forces. But Admiral Chen had one more. Surprise. All ships launch assault pods. Full deployment. Thousands of small craft shot out from the human ships like seeds from exploding fruits. Each pod carried a squad of soldiers in full armor, equipped with everything from plasma rifles to primitive swords. The hive ship's defenses, adapted to counter large spacecraft, couldn't track the tiny assault pods. They were too small, too numerous, and moving too erratically. Now for the fun part, Chen said. All ships activate ramming protocols. The human vessels weren't really going to ram the hive ship. At the last moment, each ship would veer away and circle back for another pass. But the Scourge didn't know that. The biovessel's entire defensive network focused on the incoming ships, preparing to absorb the kinetic impact of 30 spacecraft, hitting at maximum velocity, which meant it completely ignored the assault pods that were now landing on its hull. Sergeant Rodriguez felt his pod slam into the hive ship's surface and immediately kicked open the hatch. Around him, 1,000 other pods were doing the same thing. Human soldiers poured onto the biovessel's hull like army ants attacking a much larger insect. Welcome to the Scourge home office, Rodriguez announced over the comm. Let's redecorate. The soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, planting explosive charges at what their analysis had identified as critical structural points. But these weren't ordinary explosives. Remember, called out Lieutenant Morrison, thermal charges first, then kinetic, then plasma. Keep them guessing right up to the end. The Scourge defenders that emerged from the hive ship's hull were adapted for space combat against large vessels. They weren't prepared for infantry combat against soldiers who used different weapons with every attack. Rodriguez watched a Scourge warrior emerge from an airlock, its biomechanical armor gleaming with adaptations to counter plasma weapons. He shot it with a crossbow. The bolt punched through armor designed to stop energy beams and left the creature twitching on the hull. Primitive. Weapons work great when everyone expects advanced ones, he reported cheerfully. Across the hive ship's surface, human soldiers were fighting their way into the biovessel's interior. Each team used different tactics, different weapons, different approaches. The Scourge hive mind tried desperately to coordinate a response, but there were too many variables, too many changes happening too fast. Inside the ship, the humans discovered something that surprised them. The hive ship wasn't just a command vessel, it was a nursery. Thousands of young Scourge entities floated in biomechanical wombs, waiting to be born into a galaxy they would help consume. Admiral, Rodriguez reported, we found their breeding center. Orders? There was a long pause before Chen responded. Standard rules of engagement, Sergeant. Non-combatants are off limits. Rodriguez looked at the floating forms. They weren't cute or harmless looking, but they weren't soldiers either. Not yet. Copy that, Admiral. Moving to the command center. It was a decision that would echo across the galaxy. Humans had come to fight a war, but they wouldn't become monsters to win it. The command center of the hive ship was a massive organic chamber filled with pulsing neural networks. At its center was something that might have been the Scourge equivalent of a brain, a mass of biomechanical tissue that coordinated their entire species. There it is, said Lieutenant Chen, no relation to the Admiral. The thing that's been commanding this whole invasion. The chamber was defended by Scourge warriors who had adapted throughout the battle. Their armor could stop every weapon the humans had used so far. Rodriguez looked at his team and grinned. Good thing we saved the best for last. He pulled out a device that looked like it belonged in a museum. Meet my little friend. The hand grenade was human technology from the 20th century. Simple, crude, and completely unexpected. The explosion tore through the command center's defenses like they were made of paper. The hive mind died with a scream that echoed across every Scourge frequency in the galaxy. Immediately, every bioship in the system stopped moving. Every ground force froze in place. Without central coordination, the individual Scourge entities reverted to simple survival mode. All units, this is Admiral Chen. The hive ship is neutralized. Begin cleanup operations. Across Kepler 438b, human soldiers found themselves facing confused, disorganized enemies who no longer fought with tactical precision. The battle became a cleanup operation. Within hours, the planet was secure. In the aftermath, representatives from dozens of galactic species arrived to understand how a primitive civilization had accomplished what their combined fleets could not. Elder Vexithera stood beside Admiral Chen as they watched Galactic Council diplomats examine human weapons with confusion and amazement. They still don't understand, do they? Vexithera asked. They think it's about the weapons, Chen replied. They don't realize the weapons don't matter. What matters is the willingness to use them. A council representative approached them, his expression puzzled. Admiral Chen, our analysis of your tactical approach shows a complete disregard for established military doctrine. How did you know it would work? Chen smiled. We didn't, but sometimes the best way to win is to try everything until something works. That's highly inefficient, maybe, but it's also very human. The representative walked away, still confused. Other species would spend years trying to understand humanity's approach to warfare, missing the fundamental point. Humans didn't fight to follow rules or demonstrate superiority. They fought to protect people who couldn't protect themselves, and when faced with an enemy that could adapt to any strategy, the human solution was simple. Don't have a strategy. Have all of them. As news of the victory spread across the galaxy, other species began to understand that Earth was more than just another planet on the rim. It was home to warriors who would cross the galaxy to answer a cry for help. The age of humanity had begun, not with conquest or diplomacy, but with the simple message that when someone needed help, Earth would answer, no matter how far, no matter how dangerous, no matter what it cost, because that's what humans do.